Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companion and whom is following him. And thirdly, I would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to Dr. Ihda Muktianto. Assalamualaikum Pak Ihda. Selamat pagi. Who has joined with us today, Dr. Ihda Muktianto. So, dear participants, before I start the discussion today, I would like to just a little bit share with you Dr. Ihda's CV or curriculum vitae. So basically, we are so blessed today that Dr. Ihda spent his time to be with us. Dr. Ihda in Ministry of Finance right now acting as Director of Risk Management and Legal at Secretariat of Financial Sector Stability Committee, Republic of Indonesia. And Dr. Ihda is currently graduated from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, US, for the Master of Science in Finance, and also the PhD from Victoria University, Melbourne, Australia. So he has experienced so many years in the field of Indonesian capital markets law and regulations since joining the agency in 1995. And since March 2020, Dr. Ihda was appointed as the Director of Risk Management and Legal, where part of his role to prepare, conduct, and report simulation for preventing and handling crisis of financial system. Dr. Ihda and all the participants, if I please to just inform you that this program basically is the annual program, Dr. Ihda. So this program organized by International Program for Islamic Economic and Finance, Department of Economics, Faculty of Economic and Business, Universitas Muhammadiyah, Yogyakarta. So this program called International Training for Young Islamic Economic Leaders, and right now has been the fourth time since 2015. And the participants of this program basically majority from bachelor degree students from various universities, and on this. And at this year, this program is divided into 4 courses, and one of the courses is bank and non-bank financial institutions, whereby one of the part of the program is to inform the student about the role and function of the particular institutions, either in the form of regulatory institutions such as Bank Indonesia, Ministry of Finance, OJK, and LPS, and also the bank and non-bank financial institutions. So this program has been started since 19th of July, Dr. Ihda, and will be ended at 19th of August, so almost 1 month. So during the periods, the student will be given some tasks through our online learning management system, and they have already conducted some exercises, presentations, also discussions, quiz, and others during a month. So basically, this guest lecture program is to further equip them with the practical and policy practices of Okay, but hopefully in the end of the day, the students can get some broad overview, not only from the theoretical point of view, but also from practical and policy point of view. So Dr. Ihda, without further ado, I would like to hand over the session to you. And maybe you can share your thoughts around maximum maybe 1 hour. Could be less on that, and the rest will be for Q&A sessions. With that, Dr. Ihda, time is yours, please, Dr. Ihda. The audio, Dr. Ihda, is still not working. Your audio. Belum terdengar Pak Ida videonya, audionya. Okay, dear participants, so sorry, still in the process of settling the problems.
Halo, sorry, Ustaz.
Ya, sudah terdengar Pak Ida?
Hello, sorry. Good morning, Pak Dimas. Sorry for the
Yes, doesn't matter, please, Pak
inconvenience.
Ida.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, and good morning, everyone, for this very, I think, outstanding events for University of Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. And of course, for me, it is my pleasure to be here to share our role and function in Ministry of Finance related with the financial system stability coordination. So I will talk about the KSSK and then the role of each of institution, member of the KSSK, and what the regulation and the role of function of KSSK in the financial system in Indonesia. So let me share with you the presentation today. Okay, could you see my slides? Sorry, should be.
Yes, Pak, we have seen your slide.
Good, thank you. So again, thank you everyone for joining this session. So we are from the Secretariat of Komite Stabilitas dan Keuangan, Financial System Stability Committee. Actually, we are as an organization under Ministry of Finance, but actually we are supporting the KSSK, which the members consist of not only Ministry of Finance, but also Bank Indonesia and then OJK, or Financial Supervisory Agency, and then also the LPS. I will talk about the financial system stability, but before I start with that, maybe to put the financial stability in the context of a current situation, it is, I think, important to also share you with the backgrounds of current market and also global financial situations that we can use to have a sense towards the importance of the coordination of financial system or regulations. So I will talk about the sources of vulnerability, and then we'll look at the lesson that we can learn from the previous crisis, and then what we have done to reform the both in this institutional and also the regulation in financial sector in Indonesia. And I will talk about more on the law and regulations, especially in the PPKSK law, which is the prevention and resolution of systemic financial system stability. Sorry. And then lastly, I will talk about the law number 2, 2020, which the one to respond the pandemic COVID last year. That's the outline that I will share today. First, it is important for us to look at the current situation, and this is important to see why a financial system is important, maintaining, monitoring, as well as the handling or manage the financial stability is important. So as we can see that currently we're still facing or dealing with the uncertainty due to the pandemic. The number of cases still increasing, although we see the efforts to speed up the vaccination is already taken place in not only domestic but also in global markets and countries. This have of course a challenge for our economic as well as financial sectors. So the impact is, of course, the immediate recovery may not be achieved as fast as predicted previously. And also, if we look at our dependency on the external financing, especially due to our quite shallow domestic financial sectors, result in higher risk due to, especially currently, if we look at the US financial market, the starting discuss to propose quantitative easings, which will unavoidably create a vulnerability in the emerging markets, especially the one who has higher involvement or higher participation of foreign investors. And also, if we look at our economy, the dependency on the commodity-based export is also put our economies more vulnerable due to both not only the price volatility, but also the demand volatility. So if we look at these products, it's mostly exported to the countries that is also dealing with a pandemic. So it is important for us to look at this dependency on commodity towards our financial and also economic stability. And if we look at this, also important to note that global communities being more concerned on the green related issues. This is also important for us to challenge this the issues toward our market stability. And also, if we look at the domestic side of this situation, we know that pandemic has been requested or requires lots of attentions and resources. We can see this especially from the financial sectors as well as the government budgets. So in the financial sectors, the issues also the economic as well as financial issues. in OJK, for example, response the issues with provide relaxation or measures policy to dealing with the increasing credit risk on their creditors. It means that if the relaxation on the policies lifted, then it will be higher or increasing the risk of being non-performing loans, which will has of course still offer risk towards the financial sector as general. And also if we look at current situation in the real sectors, especially in the corporate sides, we can see the ability of the corporations to provide or to pay their liabilities or their debts is getting decreasing. It means that the support from the banking sectors that has been provided with the restructuring and everything could be put in risk if the corporate being bankrupt or could be filed by the creditors to be insolvent. This is also important if we look at the impact to the financial sector, especially to the banking industries. But we need to also note that our financial sector is still dependent on banking sectors. It's about 74% of the total financial assets are coming from banking industries. And although we need to finance our developments, mostly long-term developments, but in fact, we have limited long-term source of financing to be provided by the domestic institutional investors such as fund managers, pension funds, insurance company. But unfortunately, these industries or these institutional investors are still limited. And also, we still find the differences between banks and other financial institutions which provide the uneven playing field. And of course, there is a consequence of a high supervisory cost. This the context from the current situation, especially due to pandemic as well as the fundamental situation of our financial sectors. And then if we learn from the previous crisis, we can see that, for example, Asian financial crisis in 1997 or 1998, and also the global financial crisis in 2008. Although at that time almost all countries are affected, including Indonesia, we learned that at that time when we rescue a relatively small banks due to potentially systemic risk to the financial system, the rescue itself is actually successful, but the impact of the decision is created both legal and political discussion in our country, even sometimes still being discussed until now. So we need to learn from how we manage and handle our crisis previously. And we found out that we need a robust legal basis for an effective crisis resolutions, as well as clear mandates to each institutions. So this is the first that we can learn from the crisis. And then we need to also reform our institutional setting to safeguard financial stability and to resolve banking problems more effectively. So for sure, we need to also learn from the international experience, and we need to learn and adopt the best practices to be our, of course,
Pak Hida, the voice is not there. It's not working.
With the 1997 Asian financial crisis, for example. So in 1998, we amended the banking law. And then we also strengthening the BI law in 1999. And in the context of state finance for the fiscal power, Ministry of Finance especially, we enacted the law of state finance law in 2003. And in 2004, we have a new, at that time, state treasury law or Undang-Undang Perbendaharaan treasury law. And also again, we amend the BI law, and starting on from 2004, this is a milestone to establish LPS, the Indonesian Deposit Insurance Corporations. So we have LPS law in 2004. And learning from the global financial crisis in 2008, we have a new laws in Syariah bankings, and also we have a government regulation or PERPU, which amends the BE law and LPS law. And also actually at that time, we also have a government regulation. Actually, it is a government regulation, a special regulation, which were enacted in emergency conditions. So we enact this regulation before we amend the law itself. So once we provide the government regulation of PERPU, then we will submit to the Parliament for approval. And then if Parliament approved, then it becoming law. But unfortunately, among the three laws or government regulations, one of the PERPU, which is a financial safety net, was not approved by the Parliament. So that in 2009, only two of the PERPUs were approved. And in 2011, we have a new regulation, a new institutions, OJK, Otoritas Jasa Keuangan, or Financial Service Authority. And in 2014, we have insurance law, amended insurance law. And then in 2015, actually, the government regulation that has been proposed in 2008 was revoked in 2015. And that was provided by the new so-called financial safety net law, actually in 2016, which called Prevention and Resolution of a Financial Crisis Law, or PPKSK. Yeah. And then last year, in response to the pandemic, we also released a new law, which especially to address state finance, keuangan negara, and also the financial sectors. Those all regulations are drafted Ministry of Finance in cooperation and collaboration with all stakeholders in financial sectors. So these reforms and milestones is very important to respond any issues in the financial sectors. And if we look at the institutional settings, start before crisis in 1998, at that time we still have only two main institutions in the financial sectors. The first is Ministry of Finance, and secondly is Bank Indonesia. So as you may see from the slide, at the time, Bank Indonesia, in addition to monetary authority, is also has mandate to supervise the banking industries. And also, Ministry of Finance, in addition to fiscal authority, is also play roles as a prudential regulation authority, especially on the capital market and non-bank financial institutions. And actually, also during the crisis in 1998, Ministry of Finance or governments also provided the blanket guarantee to secure the public confidence and on domestic banking sectors, because at that time we still have not established the LPS. And also government to handle or to manage the crisis at the time launched a banking recap program by establishing the Bank Restructuring Agency or BTPN IBRA. So from this experience, we identified some weaknesses that we need to better and balance mechanisms. And then this provide potentially moral hazard, especially coming from bank management, the owner, the customers, as well as the regulator. And of course, due to the systemic and high impact on the economy, then the role of the government to maintain stability at cost of higher state budgets, and this will be burden of the taxpayer. So this is what we learned from the institutional setting at that time. So that's why if we look at the current landscape of our authorities and institutions of financial sectors, we have four institutions responsible for financial system development and stability. First, Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance as a fiscal authority and also the one who has a power to set general policy in the financial sectors, has a very important role to maintain or to set a higher standard of finance sector policy. And then if we look at the Bank Indonesia as a monetary authority, they has also provide lender of last resort from the banks who deal or who has a problem in its liquidity. And OJK, which was established in 2012, is an integrated prudential regulation authority on banking, non-banking, and also on capital markets. And in 2004, we also established LPS with a mandate to operate a limited deposit insurance program that funded by the banking industry. So if we look at these four institutions or authority, we can see here that among these four institutions, only Ministry of Finance will fall under the presidents. So the challenge, of course, is how we can have a best design the coordination mechanism works for these four institutions. So the coordination mechanism actually is already started long time before the institutional settings is currently present. So before we have LPS, when the institution is still BI and Ministry of Finance, we already have a coordination to, at the time, ensure that banks have had access to emergency liquidity assistance, or ELA. Then subsequently, the forum, the coordination was expanded to include the LPS. And under the GPSK law, which was explained in the previous slides, there was strengthening coordination between Ministry of Finance and Bank of Indonesia. Unfortunately, it was not approved by the Parliament, and then we have the OJK law in 2011. This law provides provision on how the coordination of the now 4 institutions, including OJK, to coordinate and to cooperate to manage the financial stability. Until the OJK law was enacted, the forum is established based on MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding, between Ministry of Finance, Bank of Indonesia, OJK, and LPS, which is the mechanism that is quite common in other jurisdictions as well. And after the PPKSK law issued in 2016, we learned from the previous experience that the MOU is not sufficient, especially for 2 reasons. First, it's not legally binding to the parties involved. And secondly, it is unable to offer or among the 4 institutions. We need to make a regulatory forbearance, and existing regulation may not be applicable. That's why we need to have the strength or stronger legal basis for the coordinations. That's why Financial System Stability Committee was established in 2016 based on the PPKSK, on the Prevention and Resolution of Financial System Crisis Law. The law serve as a main protocol for the coordination and cooperation between the MOF, BI, OJK, and also LPS. So this is now. We have what so-called as financial system safety nets. This is important. So since the crisis, we have seen that we have amended and issued several laws and regulations in order to enhance our institutional settings on the financial system safety nets. So the financial system safety net itself primarily aimed at crisis preventions. However, this framework also include a crisis resolution mechanisms, so that it doesn't occur large cost to the economy if it happens. So the ultimate goal of the safety net is to maintain our financial system stability, so that the financial sectors can function normally and have a positive contribution to the economic development. So if we look at this 4 safety nets, so in principle, we started with the first nets, which include the effective banking regulation and supervisions. It is conducted by OJK. And then secondly, if the banks has a problem, normally started with the liquidity problem, and then the banks need access to the liquidity support, then they can access to the what we call as short-term liquidity loan from the Bank of Indonesia, or PLGP, or also PLGP Syariah. As the lender of last resort, then central banks provide the second net if the first net, which banking regulation and supervision is not enough or not sufficient to dealing with the problems in banking sectors. And if it is still not sufficient and the banks is getting worse, then we have LPS. LPS here is deposit insurance authority or institution, and also bank resolution authority. The experience shows that an adequate deposit insurance scheme is an important element in maintaining financial system stability. So in this regard, LPS has two main responsibilities, which are deposit insurance, deposit guarantee, and also bank resolution or authority to handle insolvent banks. This is very important to maintain our financial system, especially in the banking sectors. The one who dominant in our financial market has been explained in the first slides, provide stability in our financial sectors. And lastly, government, which here Minister of Finance as the fiscal authority and also the one who is responsible for policymaker in financial sectors, also provide support to the BI or central banks and deposit insurance in terms of solvability or capital adequacy. So based on the Bank of Indonesia law and LPS law, government has put some additional capital if there is some minimum threshold reach, and this should be one of the authority of the Minister of Finance on the government. So in the implementations of those four safety nets, of course, requires effective coordination. SK law. So I think this context is provide us very strong argument why we need to develop institution in financial sectors, and we need to strengthen the coordination among the institutions in under the legal on the law. So in the next session, I will talk about briefly on the PPKSK law itself. So there are five main features of the laws. The first one is the one to strengthen coordination between the four institutions, and the strengthening banking supervision. This is important because focusing on prevention of financial crisis is means that we need to strengthen our supervisory and regulatory function on banking sectors, especially or in particular for systematically important banks or bank systemic. And also the law provide legal basis for implementation of bail-in concepts, which was, if we compare to the one before the PPKSK law was introduced, we have a bailout where the burden of the resources is coming from the government. So in this concept, the bail-in concept, the one who is responsible to manage and also to handle the problems in the banking is the one who is in the industry. So it started with the internal sources, the internal banks itself, to solve if there is a problem in liquidity or in solvability. And also in the context of industry, they collect premiums, and LPS will manage the premium to protect once if the banks failed and they need support to resolution process. And then the laws also provide provision, more comprehensive, of course, on how banks resolve the liquidity and solvability problems. Also, we can see from the law that the president has very strong roles on decide whether situations or the financial sector, the financial sector is under, I mean, the crisis or not. The coverage of the PPKSK or the law that we can see from the law number 9 2016. The first one is the prevention or monitoring and maintaining the financial system stability itself, and then the one is related with the resolution of financial system crisis, and the third one is the how the law regulate the resolution of systemic banks problems. So if we look at the prevention of financial system stability, there are at least 4 main areas that need to be monitored from the perspective of macroeconomics, financial institutions, financial markets, and financial infrastructure. So in this slide, we can see that from the financial institution, there is also concern on the bank resolution, both in normal and crisis conditions. And if we look at in particular in this law, there is a very complete regulation on systemic banks problems. Why we need to focus on these systemic banks? First, because it prevents the failure of payment system, because as the bank is systemic, then interconnectedness among the banks and at the end the financial sectors is quite risky. And that's why we need to prevent the failure, and why we need to focus on the systemic banks. And also we need to protect public deposits, which mostly managed by the systemic banks due to its nature as the one who has higher or larger asset as base or for LPS to collect the premium. So next, I'll show you how the coordination itself means by the regulation on the laws. The first, it means that the KSSK, who has 4 members here. So the members of the KSSK is not the institutions, but the chairman on the head of institution. The first is Minister of Finance. The second is the governor of Bank of Indonesia. The chairman of the OJK, and the chairman of board of commissioner of LPS. So 4 head of institutions are the member of the KSSK. And coordination also means that we need to have close coordination, and it can be represented by meetings. So the law requires the KSSK to have at least a quarter meetings. So we have 4 quarter meetings during a year or at any time upon request of a KSSK members. So this regulation also requires that meetings has to be attended by all the members. Ministry of Finance here is coordinators, and in terms of a decision-making process, chairman of LPS, although has the right to express their opinions or to contribute to the discussion, but it's no voting rights on the decision-making. This is important because as we have 4 members, so it is easy for us to look at the reasons why we exclude LPS in a decision voting process. So we need to at least have odd members, so easier to get a conclusion or consensus. And also, if we look at the decision or the meetings, actually the decision will be followed or will be conducted by the LPS. It means if the LPS included in the decision-making process, then there will be a sort of a quite conflict of interest due to its consequence to the decision made. And then coordination also means that we need to have both meeting and coordination at high and also technical level. We or KSSK might establish a task forces or working groups to assist KSSK. And coordination also means data and information sharing through the Secretariat of KSSK. That's why we need to provide regular reports on the financial stability monitoring our issues. And then we also have integrated assessments to financial stability situations, especially to prepare the KSSK meeting, but for the one is regularly held every 3 months, and also anytime if it is requested by the members. Also, coordination means public communication or strategy. So we need to provide information to the public, what have we done, KSSK done, and share it to the public, including we have joint statements to address the emerging issues through a press conference or press release. And also coordination means that we need to have policy communication among the 4 institutions. So to determine the measures to prevent and resolve financial system crisis, the policy coordinations through a KSSK is needed, and to some extent, if it is necessary, then all of the members have to provide recommendation to the president whether we need to establish a resolution or financial system crisis status. And then coordination also means that we need to strengthen our market conduct and prudential framework, including here is regulation and supervisions. So we in the KSSK provide inputs on drafting new or amended or existing laws and regulations. which regulates all of the foreign institutions as well as the industries. We also have a coordination to support in the, for example, if there is an assessment conducted by the third parties, independent third parties, including IMF or World Bank, for example. And also we have some other issues that has been discussed under the KSSK coordination, including the one that we have been released early this year, related with the integrated policy measures to respond the economic recovery due to the pandemic COVID-19. KSSK has also developed what we call as crisis management protocol. So this is an important tool for the KSSK, because if we need to maintain the stability of financial system, then we need to have indicators. We need to have tools to monitor. That's why under the PPKSK law, we are developing what we call as management protocol, a crisis management protocol. The CMPs are developed in each of the institutions, Ministry of Finance, Bank Indonesia, OJK, and LPS. And also in the level of KSSK, we develop CMP at a national level. The criteria and indicators itself is quite integrated to cover all financial infrastructure, as well as payment systems, deposit insurance, and bank resolutions. Those all of indicators has been developed being what we call as a crisis management protocol. And then we also conduct crisis simulation exercise. This is the one that is a regular program in the KSSK conducted every year. So this is important to identify gaps or related on related regulations, as well as the implementations of the regulation itself. So it is important, because if this happened during the crisis and we don't have a simulation yet, then it is risky for coordination being not working as fast as expected. And also, we need to promote a greater international cooperation with other institutions, including here IMF, World Bank, Asian Pacific, etc. That was from the first content of the PPKSK law, which related with coordination among the four institutions, what coordination means. Secondly, we talk about the why we regulate a systemic bank more comprehensively in the PPKSK law. So if we look at the risk of the risk of the systemic banks due to its size of asset, capital, and also liabilities, the interconnectedness with other banks and also financial institutions could trigger a failure of not only the individual bank itself, but also other banks, as well as the financial services sectors, could be partly or could be systematically could impact on the disruption of economic as a whole. That's why we need to focus on the systemic banks. The laws also regulate how the OJK with coordination in coordination with BI to determine which one of the banks categorized as systemic banks. So a bit different with the regulation before the PPKSK law, the systemic banks is predetermined by the OJK. Previously, before this law was issued, the status of banks, whether systemic or not, is decided by the KSSK when the problems is occurred. So this is risky because there will be quite complicated issues that need to be considered if we need to put banks whether systemic or not, because it will have a consequence on how the government or the authority will resolve the problems of the banks, because the systemic bank could be more complicated than need more attention. And also there are some regulation on the systemic banks, especially to reduce the probability of defaults and to minimize the moral hazard. So, for example, there's a requirement to have a capital adequacy ratio and as well as the liquidity coverage ratio, requirements on a capital surcharge capacity to absorb if the banks have financial problems, and also requirement to have a recovery plans approved by the OJK to the systemic banks. It is a plan for banks if something happened and the banks is already prepared long time before, and it will be better to manage the problem because they already have the recovery plan. And then in the PPKSK law is how the law ensures or makes sure that the central bank can provide the short-term liquidity lending, or what we call this emergency liquidity assistance, as the role of BI as a lender of last resort. So the short-term liquidity can be provided by the banks, especially or only to the illiquid but solvent banks. So only the one who is illiquid, but the bank must be still solvent. So there still have a prospect of going concern, and this is based on the OJK assessments, and could be provided the illiquid what we call as PLGP or PLGPS, provided for not only in the systemic banks, also non-systemic banks. The liquidity assistance on the liquidity loan is guaranteed by collaterals, and the decision granted by the BI, the one who is decides whether the bank is eligible to get the PLGP or PLGPS or not, and then after the decision, if the banks are eligible for getting the liquidity, then the OJK in coordination with BI will supervise the banks more, especially in the context of repayment ability. This is important both for the banks and also for the BI to manage the loan provided by the bank can be repaid back to the BI. This is the third actually net, if we look at the previous financial safety nets. So started with the ini actually it's not only the third one, but also started from the first and then the fourth one. So the first is intensive, the supervisions and the surveillance actually is under the regulation and supervision by the OJK, where OJK will provide supervision as well as regulation on banks who has a problem on their liquidity or still have a solvency. And then if it happens to systemic banks, then the one who will decide whether the banks has to be handed over to the LPS is the KSSK. So if we look at here, KSSK meeting, so here the resolution measures by OJK is unable to resolve the solvency problems. And then OJK will call for meeting to decide and to hand over the banks from OJK to LPS. If it is happen, then KSSK will determine the resolution measures to resolve the banking solvency problems, which here include the process of handing over from the OJK to LPS. And then the PPKSK law is also provide more choices actually for LPS to have a resolution to the failed banks. If we look at only from the LPS law, there are only two options. The first is open bank assistance or temporary capital injections, and the second, if it has happened to non-systemic banks, could be strictly liquidated or liquidations. In the PPKSK law, we have a purchase and assumption option and also the bridge banks. Actually, those two mechanisms of resolution quite similar in the context of how the LPS will divide or will transfer the good and bad asset and liabilities to the other banks. If purchase and assumption, the other banks are the existing banks, and then it means that the process will require LPS to transfer the good asset and liability from the failed bank to the existing commercial banks. And then LPS will keep the bad asset and liquidity exists in the failed banks and subsequently will be liquidated. Whereby in the bridge bank, the good asset and liability is transferred to the new established bank, or what we call as a bridge bank. So it's a matter of the recipients of the assets and liabilities. The one with in the purchase assumption is the existing banks, but for bridge banks, is the one is established especially for resolution process of the failed banks. So if we look at the underneath in the slide, we can see that the three options can be used to systemic banks, but for liquidation actually is only available for non-systemic banks in addition to the other three. This is the how a law provide more options to the LPS to resolve a failed bank. In the law is also provide a regulation on how if it has happened during the crisis, could be possible where not only one or two banks failed, but it has happened to some banks, then it will be important to have a program, not only the one to handle one or individual banks, but the program to establish to resolve banking problems all together. So here the mandates and the power of LPS is much powerful in terms of how LPS can handle the problem in banking industries, especially if it has happened during the crisis, and it involves not only one or two banks. And also it is mentioned in the law that the source of funding should be from the first shareholders and other parties related with the banks, and then the proceeds of the asset and liabilities if it is resolved, and then the contribution of the industry. So there will be like a premium specific collected by the LPS to develop, to run the banking restructuring program. It also could be a loan obtained by, from the other parties. And if we look at the Ministry of Finance, actually quite similar to the one that has been discussed in this slide, financial safety net before. So basically, if the capital of BI less than 2 trillion, then government has to step in by profit additional capital. While for LPS, the threshold is 4 trillion rupiah. And the budget is provided by the levies collected by the OJK. So it's been self-funded from the industry. A bit more about the bail-in. Basically, this concept requires individual level contribution and industry level contribution. Both starts from preventions until the establishment of mechanism to handle the banking problems. Those are regulations coming from the PPKSK law. So I think a bit more, I will a bit faster on this one. So in response to the pandemic COVID-19 last year, government and then subsequently parliaments approved the law number 2/2020 to strengthen the authority among institutions. So basically the law provide more greater power to the KSSK, to dealing with the situation due to the pandemic COVID-19. So first, from the KSSK perspective, there is a regulation or there is a provision to provide KSSK to have a meeting virtually. This is important because if we talk about the KSSK meeting, the consequence of the decision made in the meeting is very important, both in the perspective of legal, politics, as well as in the financial system. That's why we need to have a proper and a clear protocols in KSSK meeting. And also there is establishment of government support that can be decided with in a KSSK meeting. In terms of Bank Indonesia, there is also a strengthening regulation on PLGPs, and also what's the requirement of the PLGP so that it can be accessed by the banks. And we also introduced what we called as special liquidity loans to the banks, especially in the systemic banks. And also we open the provide a legal basis for the BI to buy the government securities from the LPS, as well as to buy an repo. And also it is important in this BI authority to buy the government securities in the primary market. This is, of course, to support the financing needs to the government to handle the pandemic COVID, not only from the health issues, but also the social and economic impact of the pandemic. Also, there is a regulation related with the foreign exchange transactions, and then the repo to the BI. With regard to the LPS, there is regulation to strengthen LPS so that the LPS can have an access or early access to the banks. Before or initially, if we look at the regulation, the early intervention or early involvement of LPS is necessary, actually, to make sure that at the end, if the banks has solvability problems and need to be handled by LPS, then LPS will decide the best option, so that the LPS need to be involved in early stage during the banking problems. And then also regulation on sources of LPS funding, and then the consideration of the consideration of the resolution option. So it's not only look at the least cost test, but also some other consideration to make the decision whether LPS will rescue or not rescue a bank, or especially of declared as a failed bank. Then also regulated under the law number 2 is the pooling fund guarantee. So we expand the LPS guarantee coverage, so not only the deposits, but also to the group of customers. And then for OJK, there is a power to provide written orders to the financial services to perform merger, consolidation, takeovers, all of them, to make sure that the financial service institution have or follow the regulation, or as part of the OJK authority to maintain the institution, or to maintain the financial service institutions. And also there is a regulation to exclude some disclosure requirement in the capital market, especially if it is related to the prevention of and handling financial crisis, so that if it is happened to the listed companies, that could be accepted from the particular disclosure. And then electronic general shareholder meeting, it is also provided by the law number 2020. In the case of government, government can provide loan to LPS. A bit more about the coordination through the simulation. So every year we conduct simulation, crisis simulation, to make sure that all regulation, all coordination, implementation of regulation that has been in place are working properly during this is implemented. So it is something that is uncommon. If the problems occurred, especially during the crisis, then we have quite a short period of time to decide the best option, the best outcome of the policy. That's why we need to have an exercise regularly. Why we need simulation? Of course, it is important because during the crisis, we have a time constraint. Sometimes we have to dealing with uncharted territory. There is no legal basis or regulation exists, and we need to decide with an incomplete data and information, and also, of course, it involves a significant cost, and we need to consider as well the potential impact on the legal as well as political situation due to the decision made by the KSSK. That's why we need the simulation regularly. Of course, if we find the gap, then we need to regularly make new amendment on the gap if it is a regulation, or we need to have a better protocol if it is a coordination, so that the understanding of policy makers among the four policy makers could be strengthened. And of course, if we have a simulation, then we need to have a commitment to develop best fit simulation that is beneficial for all of the institutions. We need to have a clear objective. We have a credible scenario. We are supported by the IT as well as logistic. And of course, at the end, the result of the simulation is to be agreed by the all institution, and the recommendation is to be followed up. So this is the key factors of being or having a simulation exercise, to make sure that all of the regulations that has been regularly tested could be implemented if it is needed. I think those information that I can share. I may stop here, Pak Dimas, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Ihda, Dr. Ihda Muktianto, for very informative and interesting discussions. If I note some important points in your presentation, Dr. Ihda, that the financial system stability in Indonesia basically is the responsible not only for the Ministry of Finance, but also there are some important bodies that are in place, such as Bank Indonesia, Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan, and also the OJK, or Otoritas Jasa Keuangan. So all of these institutions are part and parcel in order to make the financial stability in Indonesia in place. Okay, dear participants, before I move to your chance to raise question or give a comments or maybe asking questions, Pak Ida, I have a humble question, Pak Ida. During my teaching and during my study, I'm focusing my study actually in financial system stability. My dissertation, my thesis, and my bachelor thesis also, I wrote the research in the area of early warning system of crisis, for example, developing the index for financial stability. Yeah. So I have a question in mind, Pak Hida, actually, in terms of the crisis management protocol. If I'm not mistaken, that in the crisis management protocol, the KSSK has a rights to have decisions whether the bank, for example, will be given bailout or not. Or it does mean that you have a particular threshold, yeah, so that you have the directions to what extent the decision will be made, isn't it? So my question is that does the KSSK actually have the threshold or tolerated threshold so that the crisis management protocol will be decided later on? It means that, for example, in terms of financial system stability, the system stability is in track or maybe harmful or not. So this is my first question, Pak Hida. And my second question is, if we notice about financial stability, I remember a paper written by Kaminsky and Reinhardt, the premier of early warning system mechanism, that he wrote 4 conditions in terms of financial stability: crisis and signals and crisis. There's a signal and crisis will become after that. There is a signals without crisis. There is a crisis without signals. And the last one is no crisis, no signals. But this paper or this author focuses on the area of signals but no crisis, and a crisis but without signals. So it means that the preventive and mitigative policies are important in order to prevent or mitigate a particular event. So my question is that, Pak Hida, according to your experience or your observation so far, which part that KSSK prefer, whether a preventive or mitigative policies? Because if we take preventive, of course, the cost to prevent may be quite large, but the consequence is if there is no crisis, then the cost will be just very costly, I mean. But if there is no preventive actions, but the crisis happens, so the mitigation policy will take place, and also the cost of bailout and others will come in. So it means that there is a dilemma somehow, whether the preference government in the preventive or mitigative. So I just need your humble views, Pak Hida, because you are in the policy making institutions. That's all, Pak Hida. Perhaps my humble question, Pak Hida. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Dimas, for the very interesting questions. Then it is important actually for us to learn how the KSSK here to decide what we call as crisis management protocol, as well as the crisis itself, yeah, Pak Dimas. Yeah. So with regard to the crisis management protocols, so the protocol itself, actually, the one who is developed by each of 4 institutions. So each of the institutions have a set of indicators that is monitored and assessed regularly to make sure to look at whether the situation or the condition of each sectors under their authority is in normal conditions or in crisis conditions. So each of the institution has the responsibility, has the authority to develop the indicators, to monitor, to assess, and provide the information to the KSSK to be discussed. So in this case, actually the CMP itself is more as a set of indicators rather than a set of consideration whether banks are bailed out or not. So in the case of bank problem, as I've explained before, the way the regulations provide in PPKSK law is that if banks face a problem, then the one who is responsible firstly is the bank internal sources first. So it means that the shareholders and then the management, the one who responsible to manage the problem and to recover from the problem, especially if it is started with the liquidity problem. So the bail-in concept is introduced in the PPSK law to replace the one that we called as bailed out when in the previous law, government provide a guarantee. So it's not exist anymore in that case. So in the new regulation, the concept is introduced as a bail-in system where actually the internal sources of the banks is to be one who is responsible. If it is not sufficient, then the industries will help each other organized by LPS to first of all the guarantee scheme. The guarantee scheme provided to the first bank. It is not all coming from the government. Also, if we look at the capital of the LPS, initially coming from the government, but if we look at the size of the asset of LPS currently, which around I think around 130 something trillion, are coming from the industry. So the concept of the bail-in is in place at this moment. And then how if the bank failed? The regulations introduce different mechanism to handle the bank problem. Depend on whether the bank is systemic or non-systemic. If it is systemic, then there are some set of regulations take place to make sure that the problem can be solved as fast as possible with the more tools provided not only by the government, but also not by the only the bank, but also by the SSK. This is important because we already mentioned the why we need to have more attention on the systemic banks. And again, here, if we talk about the systemic banks, the law already mentioned that the systemic bank is predetermined. It means that regularly OJK, in coordination with BI, develop a set of a list of banks that is categorized as systemic. It is important because if we decide banks as a systemic only when the banks is a problem, then there are quite problematic in terms of the possibility of a conflict of interest, possibility of political or legal issues, and I think a lot of consideration that should be take place if we decide the status, whether it is systemic or non-systemic, when the banks are facing the difficulties. That's why this new regulation, this new law, PPKSK law, introduced that the systemic bank is to be predetermined. So there will be less risk and also less conflicting on the decision making of whether the banks is systemic or not systemic. And if it is related with the threshold, then the threshold is set internally by OJK in coordination with BI. So they have a set of criteria, set of tools or indicators to decide whether a bank has interconnectedness that make or that eligible to be decided as a systemic banks. This is the one is regulated under the OJK in details. So the threshold to be both operationally and regulatory under the OJK, and it is decided during the normal conditions, not during the crisis or during the bank's problem occurred. This is very important to have a proper mechanism to handle the bank problem, both for the systemic or non-systemic banks. The second question about the crisis, whether we look at from the perspective of more on the preventions or better to mitigate if it is happen. This happen. So in terms of preventions, there are sets of tools that developed by the KSSK to prevent the crisis happened. As we have been discussed, it's related with how the institution monitored and developed CMP, for example, and then how the coordination taken place. There are a lot of situations where the coordination of all of the four institutions being strengthened during not only normal situation, but also in stressed situations. And as well as in mitigation perspective, the law mentioning how the infrastructure that has been developed has been regulated under the laws. So in this case, of banks, both systemic or non-systemic banks being handled by the authority. This is a kind of also how the authority set of regulation to mitigate so that the problems that exist on individual banks not transferred or not transmitted to the larger sectors, industries. So the mitigation is also part of the spirit of the law, KSSK law. So basically, the law, I believe, already consider the right balance between the preventions, mitigation, and also the handling of the crisis itself. So all of those instruments, tools, infrastructures has been developed so far. We believe that properly in the PPKSK law. So since the beginning, we know from the signals from the CMP whether the condition of the financial system stability is in normal condition, in stressful condition, in crisis conditions. And then regularly we have a meeting to discuss the situation of the financial sectors, not only the financial itself, but also the all related industries which affect the financial sectors that I already mentioned about the impact of the corporate sides, for example, when the pandemic COVID make the corporation becoming less affordable to finish their repayment on their loan to the banks, for example. This is kind of so I believe every single part of the laws has provided a clear guideline on how we can prevent, we can monitor, we can handle the crisis at the right best balance, so that we can manage and we can minimize the cost of a crisis if it is occurred. That's Dimas.
Thank you, Pak Ida. I have got your answers that we have to look for the balance between the mitigations and also the preventive actions. Yeah, the thing that important, Pak Ida, that we have to stress here, that in terms of the policy response, we cannot be go to the mitigative or we go to the preventive, but we have to be wise to look for which one is the best balance between these two, and look for the low cost impact of this action or the policy making that given to the economy. Okay, Pak Ida, we have another question from the students. For your information, Pak Ida and other colleagues from KSSK, that our participants here coming from various universities, from Malaysia and also some Indonesian university as well, with different backgrounds. With that, I open the session to the participant. Ask your question directly, if ya, Dr. Ida. Mas Jaja, Pak, time is yours.
Halo.
Mas Jaja.
Terima kasih, Pak. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yes.
My name is Jaja Haryono from IAI Bunga Bangsa Cirebon. Permission to ask Mr. Dr. Ida Muktianto. Pak, we are currently facing the COVID-19 pandemic and also an economic sector. It's difficult to develop because everything is limited. My question, so what the role of KSSK in the dealing with the current pandemic crisis, and what can we help as a student? Thank you.
Okay, Pak Jaja, Pak Ida, you can please.
Thank you, Pak Jaja. Good.
And response?
It is quite clear because once the ability of the corporation or financial real sectors impacted by the pandemic, and they have a deficiency on or difficulties on their financial ability, both because of they couldn't get revenues, or they couldn't achieve their targeted profits. That impacted to the ability to pay their obligations to the mostly financial institution, or if we look at the financial sectors, mostly are banking. So the integrated policy coordinations that has been released by the KSSK on February 2021 was related with these issues. So the KSSK already tried to look at the economic sectors impacted by the pandemic. So we classify the industries into at least three groups, which are the one who are lag behind. It means because their impact from the pandemic quite hard, such as the tourism industries, which include hotel, restaurants, and cafe, and also some transportations industries. Those the one who is in groups that is highly impacted by the pandemic. And also we note that there are also some industries quite resilient toward the pandemic, such as telecommunication, for example, some drinks and food or beverage industries, pharmaceutical industries, and also there are some in-betweens. Based on the assessments, the KSSK in coordination or together in KSSK for institutions, we issued measures or policy to provide support to the industry so that our economy could recover as fast as possible, and the impact on the difficulties not affect the banks, especially transmitted through the repayment or the credit mechanism. So, for example, at that time, or is still in process and also is still working now, is from the fiscal side. If we may aware that there are quite a lot of economic recovery program released by the governments, including, if we might remember, government issued a policy to lowering or even eliminate the tax on automotive, for example. At the same time, OJK provided support to minimize the requirement of having or provide a credit to the consumers who buy a mobile or automotive or car. And also BI at the same time provide measures on especially macro prudential policy to make sure that in the case of BI, the LTV or loan to value required by the automotive or to other consuming goods are relaxed. So in the coordination of OJK, Ministry of Finance, as well as the BI, on a example of one single issues which regard to the automotive industries is integrated. So this is kind of coordination, concrete coordination in the context of maintaining the economic recovery. In addition of this, there are a lot of measures or policies issued by the KSSK institutions or KSSK members in ensuring that the economic recovery can be we can have a faster economic recovery together, the policy together in KSSK. So I think if we learn from the list of the sort of policies, it is important that as publics or here maybe students can see how the coordination works in practice, or the coordination in level of government or in high level officers can be implemented in practice. For example, if there are some support from the government to the SMEs. As students, maybe we can look at whether the implementation of such policy really get in the right target. Whether, for example, UMKM or SMEs in our locals has benefit or get assistance from the program, so that we can have a sense of policymakers when they decide the policy. And if it is something that we find or we identify is not working, then we can have assessment, or we can have research or recommendation to the policymaker to improve or to make sure that the policy really get the right target and what the objective of the government and the all of the KSSK members to make sure that the economic recovery being achieved can be simultaneously recalibrate and I mean, we can have this such a recommendation to the regulators on the policymakers. I think this can be interesting venue for students to look at the from the practical side or the research perspective.
Okay, Pak Mas Jaja, Brother Jaja, I hope your question has been answered by Pak Ida.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Ida.
Yeah. Okay, Brother Jaja, that you see from the answer from Pak Ida, actually the response of KSSK in regard of the COVID-19 actually tries to coordinate, yeah, and accommodate all of the members, yeah, within the committee to handle and gather together to solve the problem of the COVID-19. So the coordination to OJK, BI, LPS, and also the Ministry of Finance actually is the main task of the KSSK, so that the problem of the COVID-19 in terms of the policy response is integrative, yeah, integrated, yeah, and connected to each other. Okay, Pak Ida, we almost run out of the time. Time goes very fast. Actually, very interesting discussions. Okay, maybe any students has any question, please. Any other question from participants, or you have any comments? By the way, Pak Ida, the student here before meet up or before listen to you, they have already conducted some assignments and also presentation regarding with the KSSK, Minister of Finance, BI, LPS, and OJK. So I think your explanation just now is to maybe comprehend, to make the explanation of the previous sessions will be more complete and more comprehensive, and confirming what they have already learned before. So alhamdulillah, I hope all the participants here have already got understood, and then you really can connect between what the rule of the BI, LPS, OJK, and the Ministry of Finance under the framework of Financial Stability Committee. Yeah. Okay, sisters, any questions from you before we end the session? Safiko, you will have questions? No. Okay, Pak Ida, because we also in the Friday right now. So before we end the session, Pak Ida, we want to get your advice, Pak Ida, or your wise words to our young generations here in regard of the future challenges. What should be the young generation like Brother Jaja here should be prepared, and what should be done so that our generation, including myself, Pak Ida, I'm still young here, by the way.
Yes, I can see it's still young.
I'm the same age with Pak Eddie actually. So and maybe we need to get your humble advice, Pak Ida. Please, Pak Ida.
Yes, thank you, Pak Dimas. I think the challenge currently is quite interesting. I mean, we have a condition that we need to prepare not only through the academics experience, but also we need to learn more on the practical issues that related with our subjects or our interest or in discussion in campus. So in the context of current situation, actually we can have quite lots of informations, policies, and also impacts to the economies that we can learn, and we can have perspective, or we can improve our understanding. So it means that it is not enough only from the textbook, because the best option on the best decision only coming from textbook. There are a lot of decision has been made based on their professional judgment, and this is something that we need to improve all the time. So the experience, the capability of dealing with problems will improve, will expand our skills, in addition to the knowledge that we obtain from the classes, or from the books, from the academic setting. So I think it is important for us to also read, to analyze, to look at what happened actually in the real situation, because the key is that the economics, especially financial and also economic in general, is not something that is fixed. It is dynamic, and sometimes there is a gap between the reality and the textbook. So that it is important, or it is interesting, if we can see how the response of the regulators, the policymakers, and compare that with the one in the textbook, and this will enhance our skill to dealing with the future challenges. So in the future, we will have a different challenge. I believe that it will be more complicated, something that we cannot imagine currently. And this is important if we have a sharp skill by always improving our sense to look at, to analyze, to at least follow the real situation, especially during this recovery or economic everyone here in the Zoom.
Okay, Pak Ida and other participants, I think we have already listened together from Pak Ida about his thought and his experience and knowledge on financial system stability under Financial System Stability Committee. So Pak Ida, and I want to just also welcome Pak and greet Pak Bob here and Pak Edi, yeah, from KSSK. Thank you very much, Bapak-bapak.
Yes, Pak Dimas, sorry, I haven't introduced my colleagues here. I have Mas Bob here and Pak Edi from the Secretariat.
Ya, ya, salam kenal Pak Bob dan Pak Edi. Semoga ke depan masih bisa berinteraksi dan berkolaborasi. Baik. Okay, Pak Iza and Pak Bob, Pak Edi, and other participants, I think we have been in the end of the session. Again, on the behalf of International Program for Economics and Finance, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta, I would like to extend again my thanks and appreciations to Pak Edi, Pak Ida, Pak Bob, and Pak Ed, and all of participants who have joined and participated on these events. And hopefully this is not the end of this collaboration, Pak Ida, and we wish that we will have more collaboration ahead, such as maybe practical training or internship or others. I think we can get more collaboration, inshallah. Okay, dear participants, thank you very much. Before we end, I just want to notice that our discussion today basically is very important to further strengthening and sharpening your understanding in terms of how the financial system stability in Indonesia are well maintained and managed. Yeah, so I wish in your understanding right now that the Ministry of Finance, Bank Indonesia, as central banks, LPS, and also OJK is one and integrated bodies in together to support the existing financial stability and to cater the challenges ahead, inshallah. With that, I end Pak Ida, Pak Bob, and Pak Edi by reciting Hamdalah together. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. And wish everybody here stay safe and healthy. I end. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you Pak Dimas, Bapak Ibu.
Terima kasih semuanya, Pak Ida, Pak Bob, dan Pak Edi dan teman-teman. Sehat selalu.
Sehat selalu. Amin.
Oke, silakan Bapak.
Oke, izin live Pak Dimas, Bapak Ibu.
Silakan.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.